Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give everyone a moment to join into the webinar room as our attendees start creeping in. Uh-oh, Jen, you're gonna have to. Give everyone a couple more minutes to log in. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started. Just want to welcome everyone to Culture Chats at Lunch. This is our first session. My name is Lauren Gould, and I'm the CEO at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. It's a pleasure to meet you all through Zoom if I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet. I'm really delighted to be launching this series today, which is a collaboration between the Ontario Regiment RCAC Museum, Oshawa Museum, Oshawa Public Libraries, Parkwood Estate, and the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. Oshawa's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums have been actively engaging the community virtually through the pandemic. We see this series as an opportunity to share some stories with both faithful and new audiences through fun, accessible talks and programs, which are intended to support connection and well-being. As organizations all located in the city of Oshawa, we collectively understand and appreciate the importance of positioning ourselves on this land. You may be joining us from elsewhere, and I encourage you to visit native-land.ca to understand the Indigenous history and languages of where you live if you're not joining us from the local area. We acknowledge that Oshawa, the land on which we live, learn, work, and play, is located on the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Scugog Island Nation and the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe. Today, our Indigenous communities continue to contribute to the life of the city and to celebrate their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the land and waterways as sacred. Today, we'll be talking about waterways as part of our discussion and looking at some Indigenous artworks from the RMG collection too. We see this as vital to our learning, understanding, and work towards reconciliation. I'm so happy to be joined today by two members of our curatorial team, Val Frappier and Heather Riley, each of whom will share how they've been inspired by different themes in our collection, Lake Ontario and the color and vibrancy of printmaking in the cold of winter. We are grateful to Young Canada Works program, which is funded by the Government of Canada and facilitated by the Canadian Museums Association, for allowing us to host Heather and Val as curatorial assistants. It infuses fresh perspectives to the gallery, and I'm thrilled they're able to share them today. We'll have some time for Q&A towards the end of our session, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation so you don't forget them. I'll first introduce Heather Riley. Heather is a graduate of the Museum and Galleries Studies program at Georgian College, who previously studied art and art history at the University of Toronto and Sheridan College, where she focused on printmaking and medieval art and architecture. She studied in France for a summer in 2017, back in the before times. Heather is experienced with curating, teaching, exhibitions, and collections, and she's also an artist who works mainly in printmaking and sound art. I've asked both Heather and Val to share with me what their favorite place in Oshawa is. And Heather said that her favorite place in Oshawa, even though it's cheesy, she said it was the RMG, the gallery, because she loves it so much and it brings her such peace. So without further ado, Heather is going to talk to us about her online exhibition, Brilliant Impressions. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to share this with you. So I am going to share my screen and get started. Lauren, could you enable screen sharing?
Sure thing, sorry. You should be good.
Perfect. Awesome. So again, my name is Heather Riley. I use she and they pronouns, and I have been the curatorial and collections assistant at the RMG since the end of October. So my exhibition, which is up currently, is called Brilliant Impressions, and it features prints from the Robert McLaughlin Gallery's permanent collection. So there we go. So the three things that I was really interested in focusing on for this exhibition were printmaking, color, and experimentation. I am a printmaker and I have always had a love for printmaking. So I knew that I wanted to start there. And considering that it was cold winter and it's COVID times, I wanted to bring some color and vibrancy through my exhibition to people. I also wanted to focus on the experimental aspects of printmaking, how artists take printmaking as a medium and push the boundaries, either through combining mediums or adding things to the print. I really wanted to see how experimental our artists were. So my process of selection was really about starting with print and then going through the collection, which was a wonderful experience, just being able to comb through and thinking about what was coming and what was really interesting me just visually. And then from there, I was able to build out the exhibition based on these themes. So I'm just going to briefly talk about printmaking, just for anyone who isn't really, doesn't have a whole lot of information about it. So printmaking is the artistic process of transferring an image from a matrix onto a surface. So a matrix is essentially a template. It can be made of wood or stone or metal, and essentially the artwork is incised onto the matrix either through carving or drawing or chemical processes, and then it can be inked, and through pressure it can be printed onto paper or fabric or other surfaces. Most of the printmaking methods you might hear are lithography, etching, woodcut, and screen print. All of these are the printmaking processes that are included in this exhibition. Some of them are very traditional, some of them are more new, but they all are featured in this exhibition. And the other thing about printmaking that's kind of the wonderful part of it is that you can create more than one image from your matrix. So you can create an entire series that are all the same, which makes it easily accessible, and it can be distributed to more people and more places. So I will get into some of the artworks. So this is one of the first artworks I started with, and it's Kinojuak, Eshevak's Sun Owl and Foliage. It's an Inuit print, and it is one of my favorites. She's one of my favorite artists for printmakers, and her work has such vibrancy. All of her images are very bright and very colorful, and especially in wintertime, and coming from Cape Dorset, she experienced a lot of wintertime and snow. So the vibrancy and the color really brought joy to me when I saw this image. I also have an affinity for her because she's one of the first artists, printmakers, who I was exposed to back when I was in high school. And it kind of made an impact on my entire life. I've loved printmaking since then, and I especially have loved Inuit printmaking. So this is a lithograph, and so this was done on a stone, and so it would have been drawn into the stone and then chemically etched into it. And so the color is done through several processes. And you can see through the texture that it's done with almost like a crayon to get that texture on the stone. And it's a wonderful combination of color and texture. You have areas that are solid, and the line work is amazing. This is absolutely one of my favorites, and I knew it had to be included. The next key image is John Lander's Landscape with Swans. This is a screen print, also called a serigraph. This is a process that was mostly used in advertising and commercial art, but artists took it over. A famous example of that would be Andy Warhol really made screen print famous. But I loved this one because of the really great balance between the big blue sky and the big blue ocean, and the beautiful, colorful landscape in the middle. It just felt so well balanced and so beautiful. And the detail on the swans is amazing. This image would have been made through several layers of printing, not just a simple process of one go, but several layers and layers of color and texture and these small details that could easily be lost, but he's brought them all forward. And I think that that's remarkable. The next one is Otis Tamasauskas, Muskoka chicken. And I chose this. The name is wonderful. It's so fun, and it makes you go looking for a chicken in the image, even though it's very abstract and it's very free. And the process here is etching. So typically a metal plate where you draw or gently carve into it. And again, with a chemical process, you're etching those lines deeper into the plate. And a lot of the times you don't get the freeness that you feel in this image. But it feels so loose and almost painterly. It has this drawing quality, as if it has just been quickly scribbled down, but it's clearly done very methodically, because it would have taken just so long to etch each section. And again, the color is really vibrant. There's these beautiful blues and these bright reds. And I think it's the reds that make me think of like chickens, which is really wonderful. And the final image I'm going to talk about is this one, which is Brenda Joy Lem's A Clear Flame. And this one I chose for its combination of imagery. So this image uses both photographic imagery as well as hand-drawn images and text. So this really shows off that experimentation and combination of printmaking techniques and styles. So the images that are chosen here are actually from the Bulkley collection, which is a collection at the RMG. And she's used these historic photographs and combined them with the very beautiful hand-drawn and written descriptions about her family and what's happening in the images. So it becomes this larger story told through a combination of printmaking techniques. And the way that it's been layered together really shows off how printmaking can be used in a variety of ways. The photographic images probably would have been the most difficult thing, because to get print photographic processes it can be quite difficult to make sure everything's lined up and it still achieves that photographic effect. And then the beautiful hand-drawn pieces over top, and even the text, it's so small and delicate, and to make sure that everything came through and still feels like a strong image, she's really worked to combine techniques that worked well together in a new and interesting way. So I do encourage everyone to check out the full exhibition. There's obviously more images than this, and a lot of them are very much about the vibrant colors and different printmaking techniques that are very interesting and really showcase what the RMG has in the collection and some of the really wonderful pieces that are in there.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was really fantastic and great to see so much vibrancy in the collection. I think for those of us who are familiar with the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, we don't always think about the diversity of materials that we hold within our collection. So it's great that you've been able to bring a spotlight to some of the printmaking and some of that brightness in winter as well. That online exhibition was launched earlier when there was definitely still snow on the ground and we didn't experience the spring of the last couple of days. So we appreciate you bringing that group of works together and sharing some of your favorites with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Val Frappier, who's an emerging Franco-Ontarian curator who grew up in Aurora. She recently completed an MFA in criticism and curatorial practice at OCAD University in May of 2020. She also holds a BA in Gender and Women's Studies from York U and a BFA in Art History and Studio Art from Concordia, which is also the program I studied in. Interesting tidbit. Val has also worked in editorial, facilitation, and programming roles at art and cultural organizations in Toronto, Cork in Ireland, and in Montreal. And as I mentioned, I asked both Heather and Val about their favorite place in Oshawa, and Val's favorite place in Oshawa actually has a family connection. It's the meeting room and event hall at the Paroisse Assomption de Notre Dame, the Knights of Columbus building off Hillside Avenue, which is where she has memories of Oshawa as a kid, going there for large family gatherings on both sides of her family. Her parents both grew up in the Oshawa's French community, and her grandparents have lived in Oshawa for a significant amount of their lives too. So Val is going to share with us her upcoming online exhibition, Water Sign, Echoes of Lake Ontario, which will be launching on the RMG website on the virtual RMG in early April. So over to you, Val.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you so much for having me, and to everyone that's joining us today. I'll just share my screen as well and get some images to accompany us for this discussion. So hopefully We can have that. Okay, is that good for everyone? Excellent, great. So thank you very much for the introduction, and Lauren, and for sharing some tidbits. So as mentioned, I'll just be talking about the research process for an upcoming virtual exhibition that'll be live on the RMG website in early April. So the working exhibition title is Waterline Echoes of Lake Ontario, taking focus on the lake and depictions of the lake as found in the RMG's collections. And so for this exhibition, I was looking at artworks found in the RMG's permanent collection. And just for folks who aren't aware, the permanent collection holds over 4,500 works of art at the RMG. And also the Thomas Boakley collection, which is a collection that comprises over 3,000 historical photographs of Oshawa and the Durham region, and spans over 100 years. So the exhibition is bringing together works from a variety of mediums, painting, print, and as well as photographic works, notably from the Boakley collection. And as mentioned, my name is Val Frappier, and my pronouns are she, her. So let's get into it. Just before I dive into discussing the works, I just wanted to share sort of an anecdote as to why I've grown so interested in looking at depictions of Lake Ontario. This image is not part of the collection. This is a personal image that I took. And this was 2 winters ago, in the winter of 2019. And I bring this in to say, so as Lauren mentioned, I grew up just an hour north of Toronto in Aurora in the northern GTA, and certainly was aware of the lake, but had sort of up until this winter of 2019 taken for granted its importance to the ecology of the region, and really as a life source to the region. And so during this winter, when I took this image 2 years ago, this was the first season that I spent in walking distance of the lake, and really seeing it on a nearly daily basis. And it really sort of struck me of how much it's such a living force, and just how alive it is as a living entity. And was doing these sort of walks and runs by the lake throughout, on a weekly basis. I just was really struck by that force of the lake. And I was also just growing so interested by, if you didn't know where you were, you could easily mistake an ocean, sea, because it just has such a vastness. So I began to grew more interested in learning more about the lake, its ecologies, and its histories as well. And it's sort of made its way into different projects so far, and including this one, which this exhibition for the Robert McLaughlin. So just before I speak about the works, I just wanted to share a few fun facts about the lake that I've come across since doing some research. So just to situate us here on this map, so we are, speaking from the RMG standpoint, we're right here on the northern shore of the lake. And just a few quick facts. So the Lake Ontario is the most easterly lake in the 5 Great Lakes, and is also connected to the St. Lawrence River, of course. Although it occupies the smallest geographical surface of all the lakes, it holds approximately a quarter of this population inhabited watershed, so a huge number. And it is the most inhabited watershed in all of the country, and provides drinking water to over 9 million people. So significant amount of work that the lake is doing for us in sustaining us here. And not only is it important to humans, but also to many animal species, including fish, birds, and as well as plants. And the Great Lakes together with the St. Lawrence River are the largest, one of the largest freshwater systems in the world, and harbor 20% of the world's fresh water. So very significant amount. And just to note that fresh water is generally characterized as having low concentrations of dissolved salts. So just to bring this back to the exhibition, so sort of bringing some kind of many questions that I was thinking about, just in terms of my own general thinking about the lake, but also bringing to this exhibition, are two key questions were, so for those of us living on the lake's shore and watershed, as I have been, how do we relate to the lake both individually, but also on a collective level? And what shifts when we take time to listen to the lake and to really acknowledge it as a life source? And before I continue, I also really wanted to note someone who's been significant in shaping my thinking around the lake is Indigenous scholar and musician Leanne Simpson, who is Mississauga Anishinaabe and member of the Olliville First Nation, and specifically words that she shared in a 2013 interview with activist Naomi Klein. And in this interview, she talks about her relationship with Lake Ontario and the land, and describes the lake as a familial relationship, as a relative, and the need to intensify that relationship, especially when land and water are being polluted and abused. So this really has really impacted my thinking and has stayed with me ever since I read that interview. And specifically thinking of myself, as a settler of French ancestry, really made me think about how I relate to water and land and the environment that I live in and grew up in. And so bringing this back to the exhibition, so I wondered, what stories and narratives of the lake I would find in the gallery's exhibitions, and how artists had perceived the lake over time, over the 100+ years that make up the works in the collections as well, and what could we learn from how these artists had looked at the lake. And so I found a significant amount of works from the kind of early to mid 1900s, but also a significant amount also later. So kind of bringing works from that span over 100 years. And I also just wanted to note before I present some of the works, is a criteria that I was looking for as well. I was kind of interested in looking at everything, but I was interested in the criteria of looking for when the lake almost seems to be speaking for itself in an artwork, as if it's kind of speaking on its own terms and almost like transgressing the frame of the image frame, almost like breaking out of it and really depicted as the living force that it is. And sort of bringing those kinds of works, and also maybe looking at artworks where the lake is kind of at the background of industrialization and bringing it more to the foreground. So these were kind of criteria that I was keeping in mind. So let's dive into it. So I've grouped, the exhibition is looking at approximately 30 works, and I've grouped these into 6 different themes. And so the first theme, I figured I'd start with beginnings. So looking at who, the earliest human relationships with the lake, and what stories about those would I find in the collection. This two pairing that I'm showing here, Blake DeBassage's Nunnabush and the Giant Pike, and F.W. Joplin's Etienne Brûlé Last Laugh of the Portage to Lake Ontario. So it's, as mentioned, thinking about the beginnings of Lake, so really important to situate, the history of Lake from thinking about who has been living here for millennia, being Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. So this is important for me to reference the lake from an Indigenous cosmology. And so here, Blake DeBassage is a artist, a Ojibwe artist from the Michigan First Nation on Manitoulin Island, which is near Lake Huron. And I don't think this is specifically Lake Ontario being depicted here. I felt that it's very important to depict sort of an Indigenous cosmology around water and surrounding the greater Great Lakes. So here this work depicts Nunnabush, a very important figure in Anishinaabe storytelling, and the creation of the world. And also to bring that in, and then also looking at F.W. Joplin's, which kind of references the beginning of European settlement around Lake Ontario. Etienne Brûlé is thought to be the first European voyager to arrive to the lake shores in 1615, and he had arrived from France. This work was made, it's not known when this work was made, but it's thought to be known to kind of early 1900s. It's an etching on paper. So referencing the beginning of colonization around the lake as well. So I was thinking of the beginnings in terms of earliest, human relationships with the lake, but also thinking of beginnings as what are the earliest depictions of the lake that I would find in the collections. And these are the two that I did find are maps from the Bulkley collection, photographs of maps in the Bulkley collection. So we have 1841 and 1860 respectively, and I thought it really interesting how the lake is almost depicted kind of like the flatness that is depicted in here, but almost like a negative space as well. So right, it's kind of like a void, and we see this here as well, and we have this map here on the right. We have kind of the surveyor's grid, right, which is certainly kind of noting a colonial way of looking at the land, which is like from above and with a kind of like grid view as parceling out land for settlement and later development as well. But I find it interesting how this photograph was taken. We have the lake here as kind of almost at the top of the image, but also we kind of see all the rivers like draining into the rest of the map. So it kind of is interesting to look at the lake here as being at the top of the image and shaping how we look at the orientation of the image. And I'll flip here now to the kind of second theme that I was thinking that I've conceptualized the works in are early traces of the lake in front of the lens. So where the lake itself is being depicted as it is in photograph. These are images from the Bulkley collection. We have a 1919 work here, photograph, and this one here, ice formation, Lake Ontario, likely around that time frame, early 1900s. And just referencing back the criteria I had mentioned of trying to look for traces of the lake where it's almost like coming alive and transgressing the image frame. We see here, I know this is a light leak where light is coming in through the camera onto the film. It almost looks like we can imagine it, the lake is like creeping into the frame. And then here, referencing the time of year that we're in, where ice is starting to melt, we have like this wave that's almost been like immobilized when it froze. We have this 19 year of feeling and interesting to have in the foreground to take on this really interesting 1920 the wave is like
Val, you're just breaking up a little bit. Just going to see if we can get Val back for everyone. All three of us live outside of the city and outside of the Oshawa limits, so have had various points in time where our internet has not cooperated with us in our remote work at the RMG. So while we're waiting for Val to hop back on, Heather, maybe you could talk to me a little bit about your because I know you're a printmaker as well, what your preferred printmaking practice is, and whether the work that you practice as an artist as well influences some of the decisions and some of the things that you decided to bring into Brilliant Impressions.
So for myself, as a printmaker, I mostly do woodcut and quite large woodcuts. The most recent one I did was about 2 feet by 4 feet, a woodcut. So it's quite large, and in order to print it, it requires either to be done by hand or a very like a larger printing press. So the most recent one I have done by hand, but yeah, I do very much love woodcuts because I like the texture that comes from them. But I, when looking at things, I enjoy all printmaking. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Thanks, Heather. All right, I see Val back with us. Don't worry, Val. I was sharing like we've all had our technical difficulties during the pandemic.
Be a Zoom panel if something did happen like that. It would be complete. I was right in there and I was like, oh, it's gone. Like, everything's gone. Sorry to leave you hanging. I'm back.
It's all good. It's all good. All right, we'll let you jump back into things and share your screen again.
Right. Let me share screen once again. Okay, here we go. So sorry for that interruptions, everyone. So just to pick up where I left off and to sort of wrap up so we can have our Q&A. So the third theme that I was just speaking to was looking at the lake in color in painting, so early to mid 1900s. So just sharing this work by William Blair Bruce of Lake Ontario and MMA Martin. And I thought this title here, Breakers, Ocean or Lake, kind of referenced my thinking around, you could almost mistake Lake Ontario for an ocean, just with its vastness, and certainly when looking out at its horizon line, could almost seem like one as well. And so the fourth theme is Oshawa Creek. So I was interested in thinking of what links, the RMG and Oshawa to Lake Ontario, which is Oshawa Creek, which is the kind of main water course that kind of leads and flows into Lake Ontario. So I've selected here just a few images to exemplify this from the Bulkley collection across the last 100 years. So we have this 1915 image here where it's almost like a ghostly image of the creek. And here we have from 1968. So the RMG is on the other side of this image today, but on the other side of the creek was the construction of the Midtown Mall. And then all the way to today, this is a 2011 image from Fred Sewell of the creek, where I just thought it was a really neat way of how the waves have been captured here. And the fifth theme is thinking of expansive geographies. So as we looked at the map earlier on of the lake connected to the greater Great Lakes network. So this 1910 image of the Thomas Bulkley collection, we see the steam vessel leaving the Oshawa Harbor. So we can imagine it's going to another lake, another Great Lake, to transport whatever goods it's bringing with it, or up the St. Lawrence, we're not sure, but and pairing this image with Robert Bourdeaux's Ontario, Canada from 1985, and we see here on the boat it says Nipigon Bay, which is a bay north of Lake Superior. So certainly these ships are traveling right the Great Lakes, advancing industrialization. And then looking at, along this theme, other works in the collection that were depicting other parts of the Great Lakes. We have Valerie Palmer's Perpetua, which was painted by Lake Superior. So I thought this interesting here, looking at the figures and almost how the lake is it's talking about the kind of unconscious qualities that water have of this kind of water as relating to like our emotional selves and the unconscious, and the kind of psychological aspects that we see in that painting. Here in Ed Bartram's Island Forms work, this was made on the Georgian Bay, so off of Lake Huron, and we see the parts of the Canadian Shield here in the rock. And finally, this FW Joplin's Whirlpool Rapids. So this would be near the Niagara Falls, so on the kind of opposite side of where we are on Lake Ontario, and the kind of real sheer force of the water that we see in this work here. And sort of, and the final theme that I wanted to end on is thinking about the present ecology of the lake and the future. So what's in store for the future of the lake? So we have here 2 works that look at sort of the birds, the bird population of the lake. So thinking of how it not only supports us as humans, but you know, a number of other species as well. And I love this part of Barry Smiley's communication should come this naturally to everyone. So thinking about back to my sort of one of the guiding questions of how do we relate with the lake, right? How do we commune with it, I suppose? And this Don Watton's photograph of the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority. So these measures that have been put in place to really take the environmental aspects of the lake seriously and mitigate the pollution of its waters. And the last slide is, again, continuing on this theme, we have Morris Lum's 2017 diptych that I believe is the most recent depiction of the lake in the gallery's permanent collection. So we have this diptych of the lake here with this kind of parking lot, so referencing the motor industry, vehicle industry in Oshawa, and Christiane Flug's Over the Kitchen Sink. So again, linking back to the lake providing drinking water for so many of us that live in its watershed. So that wraps up how what I wanted to share about the exhibition and the research behind it to date. I did want to make a link to another aspect that has come to the fore in the last months along the lake's shoreline, which is the Duffins Creek Wetlands. So just having shared, thinking about the lake and its ecologies, and certainly how pollution has definitely impacted the health of the lake as well as development along its shoreline. And so just for folks who aren't aware, the Duffins Creek is located between Pickering and Ajax. And up until today, there was proposed development to happen for warehouses just in this part here of the wetlands. So just where we have Bailey Road and the Squires Beach Road right here. And this was a proposed warehouse to be built on top of the wetlands, which would have posed a serious risk to the wetlands. And studies were made that said that about 50% could have been destroyed. And the wetlands certainly play an important role to mitigate flooding, control flooding or drought in the region. And if construction would have happened, it could very well have led to more flooding for residents living nearby here. Lauren shared with me a breaking news article right before our meeting today, our panel, to say that apparently the warehouse construction has just been canceled. So it more reading to note after we meet today, but it had been going on for a few months that people had been organizing to try to stop the development. And I don't know if we want to maybe talk about more in the Q&A, but I just wanted to bring attention to it, that it had been happening, and Environmental Action Now, Ajax Pickering, had been certainly trying to stop the development, as well as environmental defense. And maybe we can share more about that in the Q&A if folks are interested. But I just wanted to bring attention to it, and just as we are talking about the lake and its shoreline as well, and how we live along it. Great, so thank you so much. I'll stop my screen share. There we go.
Thank you so much, Val. That was great. And yes, I have shared some links in the chat for those of you who do want to read some more about what's been happening at Duffins Creek in the wetlands. Amazon did announce, I guess, a couple hours ago that they weren't going to build their warehouse there, but there still is the possibility of development on that site. I think for me, Val's exhibition and this sort of conversation just shows how much art can help to bring light to some issues that we're sort of facing as a society in a more contemporary way. And I think it's an interesting link for us to make as being a community that is so close to the lake, but as a sort of wider geography and wider area, do have all of these watersheds. I'm not from Oshawa, but I remember seeing the salmon in Oshawa Creek and just being completely surprised and delighted by that. And I think we sometimes forget how significant some of these waterways are to the environment. So that's an interesting side to the discussion.
Yes, yes, exactly. And yeah, to always kind of be or trying to be aware of what's happening. I'm certainly no expert on what's happening in Duffins Creek, but just have been doing some reading about it, and that you're mentioning more, and that there's the possibility that it could still be developed. And I think speaks to that, yeah, the community engagement that's been happening around raising awareness as to the importance of these, environmentally significant sites, and just to raise awareness around the ecology of it, and how, even though we don't live right next to the creek, if we don't, it could impact us as well. So it's kind of like that ripple effect that is important to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Val. We'll open the floor to some questions from anyone in the audience today. And we've had one question come in so far, but please feel free to just put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll answer them live for you. I have some other questions to help get us going as well. So we've had one question come in for you both. So maybe I'll ask Heather first, just to give Val's voice a bit of a break. But the question is, what has been the most surprising or exciting work that you've found while exploring the collection? Or maybe the most surprising and the most exciting, if there's two that come to mind.
I think that's such a wonderful and also a very hard question to answer, because when you're exploring a collection that has, over 4,500 works, there's so much to discover. But I have to say, it's more of a grouping of works. The amount of Inuit prints that I found as I was looking, again, because I have such an affinity for them, it was really exciting and enjoyable to just be able to go through them and see how many exist and how many the RMG has, and it was really a wonderful experience. And I only included 3 in the exhibition that I put together, but there's so many more, and so that was really exciting.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Heather. And when you were looking through those, and particularly in that grouping of works, were there any images that surprised you or that you hadn't seen sort of represented in Inuit printmaking elsewhere? It sort of has a very distinct style.
I think that there's a very distinct style. There's a couple that I can think of, but I'm at a loss for names right now.
That's all right.
But if it comes to me, I will. There's 2 that I'm thinking of that are a lot more like almost done in photorealism, which was very, very interesting, because after seeing a lot of the Kinojawak Ashevak works, which are it's an animal in white space, there were 2 works that came up that were very photorealistic, and it kind of was a very interesting comparison. But yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather. And Val, for you, what was the most exciting and or most surprising work as you were going through the collection, whether it was, for this exhibition or just in your work at the RMG?
It is. It's been so many of them. I think while researching for the exhibition, I was looking through the database, like putting keywords like lake and water, and just seeing the wealth of things that were popping up, and using like an aquatic lens to look through the collections was really an interesting process. But I think for me, specifically for in thinking of the lake, was the Bulkley collection and the early 1900 photographs of the lake itself, like over 100 years ago. I think that grouping, as you're saying, Heather, like it's kind of the grouping of them was really striking to me. I think too, the black and white kind of images of that time, and the ones that look a bit more ghostly were really like, yeah, very impactful. But there's been so many too. And I'm only showing a short excerpt of the ones that were part of the research, and that will be included. But yeah, certainly those ones were really neat to look at from the Bulkley collection.
Wonderful, thank you. It's hard to make decisions with curation. It's not an easy thing to do.
A long list, yes.
So I have one question here about process for you, Val, but Heather, you might also want to step in because it's about a printing process. Val, you showed a mezzotint print. So just wondering if you could talk about the process of how something like that would be made. And Heather, you can feel free to jump in as well, because I know this is a printing process. You might also have some insight in.
This is a great question, and I wish I could ask the artist to learn more, who is no longer with us. The mezzotint is really not a process I am familiar with myself personally. I will be very upfront about that. I've never used mezzoprint myself, or seen it done like myself. Heather, I'm not sure if you have more intel, because I know you're way more of the printing expert, and if you would like to weigh in, but I don't mean to put you on the spot either.
So I am not an expert, especially in mezzotint, because I have never made one, but it's a printmaking process. It's within what's called Italio techniques. So that would be along the lines of like etching and engraving, but it's a tonal method. So instead of incising lines or even dots into a plate, it's more of a gentle stippling technique to create soft tones. And that's how you get those beautiful, like soft areas that almost feel as if no line has ever touched them. And there's a couple ways of doing this, but it's a complicated process.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it almost doesn't look like a print. It's like, yeah, as you're saying, the tonal qualities.
Wonderful, thanks, Heather. Are there any other questions for either Heather or Val or myself? I have sort of one final question for you both. All right, well, I'll ask that, and if we will have time for probably one more question, if there's anybody else who wants to jump in. But I think, you know, as much as I've been pushing away all of those year anniversaries of this being, you know, the declaration of the pandemic yesterday by the World Health Organization, it's also led to a bit of a resurgence in articles about how we've all turned to art during this time, whether we've done it consciously or subconsciously. We've all read a book, hopefully been to an online exhibition or two, or participated in some digital programming in the arts and culture space, watched Netflix, watched a movie, listened to music. We've all sort of turned to these things. And I'm just curious, Heather and Val, what you've turned to, what art you've turned to during the pandemic as a way to sort of move through, what maybe has either brought you joy or sort of helped you move through some of those feelings of loneliness that I think we've all endured during this time. Anything that comes to mind that's been particularly inspirational? Could even be the series you've been binge watched.
Well, I know I have turned to more craft. So I've been doing a lot of sewing, but also I've started to turn towards like fabric and textile art, both viewing it and creating it. And I think that that has brought me a lot of joy and a lot of relaxation, especially right now.
Yeah, it's been great to see that move towards more making that's happened. Some of those old habits that people had, several generations ago are starting to see even more of a resurgence than they were sort of 5 years ago. So yeah, the textile work is certainly inspirational for me too, as someone who sews and loves the textile arts. What about you, Val?
Yeah, I think for myself, it's been really just, going out for walks in nature has been really really helping to just stay balanced. And you can call that an artful walk, sure, but I think too, like during those walks, the meditative qualities of it, but also taking photos of in nature, so like just some kind of amateur photography has just been like a really meditative process. And also just really thinking about the kind of around the environments that are around us that I think sometimes before the pandemic that wasn't always taking really the time to really think about and appreciate. Having the kind of more forced time to do that during the pandemic has really been impactful. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was living right again in between apartments. I was living right by the beaches in Toronto and really close to the lake. And this was like a year ago, right at the beginning, just going for almost daily walks by the lake when things were really, really uncertain. And that was just such a and photographing the lake every day, like those different times of day, and then looking at the series of the lake and how much it changes over time was something that was kind of a neat thing to do, and like a grounding kind of thing to act to do. So that's kind of been my my artistic practice, I guess.
Been great to see how that's influenced your exhibition at the RMG as well. There's one final question which we'll have time for, which is for you, Val. Which is about, what for you is the difference between working with artworks versus historical photographs in curating the exhibition, and how you sort of approached bringing the two together?
That's a great question. Thank you for that question. I think I was interested in bringing them both together because, photography has that kind of documentary aspect where it's like, this is the actual imprint of the lake from 100 years ago versus a painting. So I think I was interested in thinking of different modes of perception. So the exhibition will have roughly 30 fine works, and finally in the final sort of iteration of it. And we can think of that as 30 different ways of looking at the lake. So I was interested in certainly that, like looking across different mediums of perceptions, and the play between the translation, I guess, of the lake that happens from a camera, and the way the photographer is choosing to frame the lake, from a low vantage point of that one with the shipwreck image where the wave is really in the foreground, versus a painting where it's maybe more in the background and foreground, and what gets translated through painting, printing versus a photo. So I think for me, it was like different modes of perceptions, different modes of seeing and looking at the lake. But that's a really great question. Yes, I like thinking of those. The different, what changes from medium to medium is really, really a good thing to keep thinking about as I'm finalizing the exhibition. So thanks for that question.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Val. Well, we're almost at 1 o'clock, so I will pass on my thanks again to you, Heather and Val. It was wonderful to hear you bring these two online exhibitions to life. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insights. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I invite you to ensure that you have every Friday at noon booked in your calendar until May 21st for the Culture Chats at Lunch series. Next week on March the 19th, Jennifer Weymark, who's the archivist at the Oshawa Museum, will share how the museum's telling of the story of Thomas Henry has evolved over the years. It will focus on how they've used a variety of primary sources to present a more whole interpretation of who Thomas Henry was and his impact on the community. So I encourage you all to check that out. You can visit the RMG website and follow the Culture Chats link for more information on how to join each of the series from our partners. There's no registration required, so please join us every Friday if you can at noon. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend and take care. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much.